when 72-year-old Rose Martinez was found sleeping in her car outside a luxury apartment complex. The security guard who tried to move her along had no idea he was talking to the woman who owned the entire building. What happened next exposed a family secret so shocking that it made national news and changed inheritance laws forever. Before we start this incredible story, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and at the end, don't forget to rate our story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. It was 2:30 a.m. on a cold November night when security guard James Chen noticed the beat-up 2003 Toyota Camry parked in the visitor section of Grandview luxury apartments for the third night in a row. Through the fogged windows, he could see someone sleeping in the back seat, covered by what appeared to be old blankets. James had been working security at high-end properties for 8 years, and he knew the protocol. Homeless individuals couldn't be allowed to camp on private property, especially not at a building where apartments rented for $4,000 a month. The wealthy residents wouldn't tolerate it. But as he approached the car with his flashlight, something made him hesitate. The person sleeping inside was an elderly woman, probably in her 70s, with silver hair and a face that looked both dignified and exhausted. James tapped gently on the window. "Ma'am? Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you can't sleep here." The woman stirred slowly, blinking in the harsh beam of his flashlight. When she sat up, James could see she was well-groomed despite her circumstances. Her hair was neatly braided, and her clothes, while worn, were clean. "I'm sorry, officer," she said quietly, rolling down the window slightly. "I'll move along." "I'm not a police officer, ma'am. I'm just security for this building. Look, I hate to do this, but residents have been complaining about the car being here multiple nights." The woman, who looked Hispanic and spoke with a slight accent, nodded with the resigned dignity of someone who had faced this situation before. "I understand. I'm sorry for the trouble." As she started the car, James felt a pang of guilt. It was November in Chicago, and the temperature was dropping below freezing. Where was this elderly woman supposed to go? "Ma'am," he called out before she could drive away, "there's a warming shelter about 6 blocks from here. St. Mary's Community Center. They'll have a bed and a hot meal." The woman smiled sadly. "Thank you for the kindness, young man. But I've tried the shelters. They're difficult for someone my age." James watched as the Toyota pulled away into the night, its exhaust visible in the cold air. Something about the woman bothered him, not her presence, but something else he couldn't quite identify. 3 hours later, as James was completing his security rounds, he found an envelope that had been slipped under the building's main door. His name was written on the front, in elegant handwriting. Inside was a note and a $100 bill. "Dear James," the note read, "thank you for treating me with respect tonight. I know you were just doing your job, but you did it with kindness. Please accept this small gift, and know that your compassion meant more to me than you realize. Rose M." James stared at the money in shock. A homeless woman sleeping in her car had just given him $100, more than he made in a day. Where had she gotten this money? And why would someone living in a car give away what was probably all the cash she had? The next morning, James mentioned the incident to his supervisor, Marcus Williams, a 45-year-old former police officer who managed security for several luxury buildings in the area. "Marcus, this is going to sound weird, but I think there's something strange about that homeless woman I moved along last night." "Strange how?" James showed him the note and the money. "What homeless person gives a security guard a $100 bill?" Marcus examined the note carefully. The handwriting was educated, elegant. The paper was high quality. And there was something about the phrasing that suggested education and refinement. "You said her last name was Martinez." "That's what she signed, Rose M." Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking. In his years of security work, he had developed good instincts about people, and something about this situation felt off. "James, if she comes back tonight, call me immediately. Don't move her along. I want to talk to her myself." "Why? What do you think is going on?" Marcus looked at the $100 bill again. "I think," he said slowly, "that Rose Martinez isn't who she appears to be." That evening, James was positioned where he could see the parking area clearly. At exactly 11:47 p.m., The Toyota Camry returned. This time James was ready. He called Marcus immediately. "She's back. I'm on my way. Don't approach her until I get there." 20 minutes later, Marcus arrived to find the car parked in the same spot as the previous night. Through the windows, they could see Rose Martinez arranging blankets in the back seat, preparing for another night of sleeping in her car. "Ma'am," Marcus called softly, approaching the vehicle, "could we speak with you for a moment?" Rose rolled down the window, looking wary. "Did I do something wrong? I wasn't planning to stay long." "No, ma'am, you're not in trouble. I'm Marcus Williams, head of security. I wanted to thank you for your generosity to James last night." Rose looked confused. "I don't understand." Marcus showed her the note and the money. "James told me what happened. It was very kind of you, but we can't accept this. Someone in your situation needs every dollar." "My situation?" Rose asked, and Marcus noticed something in her tone, not defensiveness, but something else, almost amusement. "Ma'am, we know you've been sleeping in your car. We know you're homeless. This is a lot of money for someone." "For someone like me?" Rose finished. Marcus nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Rose was quiet for a long moment, looking at both men. Finally, she spoke. "Gentlemen, what if I told you that I'm not homeless by necessity, but by choice?" James and Marcus exchanged glances. "What do you mean?" James asked. "What if I told you," Rose continued, "that I own this building?" The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of traffic in the distance. Marcus recovered first. "Ma'am, I think you might be confused. This building is owned by Martinez Holdings, LLC. It's a real estate investment company." Rose smiled for the first time since they had started talking. "Martinez Holdings. Yes, that's correct." She reached into her car and pulled out a worn leather purse. From it, she extracted a folder of documents that looked official and expensive. "Gentlemen," she said, handing Marcus the folder, "my full name is Rosa Elena Martinez. I am the sole owner of Martinez Holdings, LLC, which owns this building and 49 others in the Chicago metropolitan area." Marcus opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were property deeds, corporate documents, and what appeared to be a recent financial statement showing assets worth over $200 million. This can't be real," Marcus stammered. "It's quite real," Rose confirmed. "I've been sleeping in my car for 6 months, moving between my own properties, watching how my employees and tenants treat people they perceive as less fortunate." James was staring at Rose as if she had just revealed she was an alien. "You're saying you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars and you're sleeping in a car?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." Marcus was still studying the documents. Everything looked legitimate. Official seals, legal language, recent dates. But why? Why would you do this? Rose's expression grew serious. "Because I needed to know what kind of person my grandson is before I die." "Your grandson?" "My grandson who lives in the penthouse apartment of this building. My grandson who thinks I've been dead for 5 years. Rose looked at the shock on both men's faces and sighed deeply. "Gentlemen, would you be willing to hear a very long and complicated story?" Marcus and James nodded, too stunned to speak. 6 months ago," Rose began, "I was diagnosed with terminal cancer. The doctors gave me perhaps a year to live, maybe less." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I have one living relative, my grandson, David Martinez. He's 28 years old and lives in the penthouse of this building." "We know David," Marcus said quietly. He's not the easiest resident to deal with." Rose nodded sadly. "I suspected as much. You see, David thinks I died 5 years ago. That's what I told him." "You faked your own death?" James asked in disbelief. "Not legally," Rose clarified. "I simply disappeared from his life and let him believe I had died. I stopped all contact, moved away, and instructed my lawyers to tell him I was gone." Marcus was trying to process this information. "But why?" Rose's eyes filled with pain. "Because 5 years ago, I discovered that my grandson, the boy I raised from age 8 after his parents died, was only interested in my money." She pulled out her phone and showed them a series of text messages dated from 5 years earlier. "These are messages David sent me when he thought I was changing my will." "Read them," Marcus read aloud. Grandma, you better not be stupid enough to give away my inheritance to charity. That money belongs to me. I've put up with your boring stories and your stupid rules for 20 years, and I deserve every penny. James winced. That's awful. Rose scrolled to another message. If you give away my money, I'll contest the will and make sure everyone knows what a bitter old woman you were. There are dozens more like that, Rose said quietly. When I told David I was considering donating most of my estate to charity, he became very unpleasant. Marcus handed back the phone. So you decided to disappear? I decided to test him. I wanted to see what kind of man he would become if he thought he had already inherited everything. Rose pulled out another folder. According to the false will I had my lawyers create, David inherited $50 million when I died 5 years ago. 50 million, James whistled. A fraction of my real worth, but enough to see what he would do with it. I've been watching him for 5 years, Marcus, watching how he treats people, how he spends money, how he lives his life. And what did you discover? Marcus asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. Rose's face was filled with sadness and disappointment. I discovered that my worst fears were correct. David has become exactly the kind of person I hoped he wouldn't become. She looked up at the building, toward the penthouse windows that were glowing with light. He treats service staff terribly. He's rude to his neighbors. He spends money frivolously while ignoring people in need. And worst of all, he's become cruel. Cruel how? James asked. Last month I watched him berate a delivery driver for being 5 minutes late. The week before that, I saw him refuse to help an elderly neighbor who had fallen in the lobby because he didn't want to get his expensive suit dirty. Rose's voice became stronger, more determined. But the final straw was 3 weeks ago. I was sitting in my car across the street, and I watched David throw his coffee at a homeless man who asked him for spare change. Marcus and James exchanged looks. They had both witnessed David's rudeness, but neither had seen him be actively cruel. That's when I decided, Rose continued, that it was time to see how he would react to encountering someone homeless himself. So you started sleeping in your car here, Marcus realized. I started sleeping in my car at all of my properties. I wanted to see how my tenants, my employees, my security staff, and yes, my grandson, treat people they perceive as beneath them. James felt a chill. You've been testing all of us. I've been learning about all of you, Rose corrected. And I have to say most of what I've learned has been encouraging. You, James, treated me with kindness, even when you had to move me along. You, Marcus, showed genuine concern for my welfare. She paused. But David hasn't even noticed me. In 6 months of sleeping in the parking lot of his building, my own grandson hasn't once looked closely enough at a homeless person to recognize his supposedly dead grandmother. The three of them sat in silence for a moment, processing the implications of what Rose had revealed. Finally, Marcus spoke. Rose, what are you planning to do now? Rose smiled, and for the first time there was something almost mischievous in her expression. Now, gentlemen, I'm going to give David one final test, and depending on how he responds, I'm going to make a decision about my real will. What kind of test? James asked. Rose looked up at the penthouse windows again. Tomorrow night I'm going to knock on David's door and ask for help. A homeless old woman asking the wealthy young man for a small kindness. And if he refuses? Rose's expression grew serious. Then he'll discover that the grandmother he thought was dead has been watching him all along, and he'll learn that his real inheritance depends on who he chooses to be. Marcus felt a mixture of admiration and concern. Rose, are you sure about this? This could be explosive. Marcus, I'm 72 years old and dying of cancer. I don't have time for subtlety anymore. She started her car. I need to ask you both for a favor. Anything, James said. Tomorrow night when I approach David, I need witnesses, people who can verify what happens in case this becomes a legal matter. Marcus nodded. We'll be there. As Rose drove away, James turned to his supervisor. Marcus, do you think she's telling the truth about owning all these buildings? Marcus looked at the documents Rose had left with them. James, I've been in security for 15 years. I've seen a lot of scams and a lot of lies. But I've never seen fake documents this good. He paused. And I've never seen anyone commit to a con this elaborate. Sleeping in a car for 6 months just to test people, that's not desperation or mental illness, that's determination. James was quiet for a moment. What do you think is going to happen tomorrow night? Marcus looked up at the penthouse where David Martinez was presumably living his privileged life, unaware that his world was about to change forever. I think, Marcus said slowly, that we're about to witness one of the most extraordinary family confrontations in history. The next evening, Rose Martinez sat in her car at 7 p.m., watching the entrance to the building she owned, but where she was not welcome. She had spent the day at a public library, using their computers to finalize legal documents that would change David's life forever, regardless of how the next few hours went. At 7:30, she saw Marcus and James position themselves discreetly near the building's entrance, as they had arranged. Both men carried small recording devices, with Rose's permission, to document whatever was about to happen. Rose looked at herself in the rearview mirror. She had dressed carefully for this encounter, clean but worn clothes, her silver hair neatly braided, and just enough signs of homelessness to be convincing. In her hands, she carried a small bag containing a few personal items and a thermos of cold coffee. At exactly 8 p.m., she walked to the building's main entrance. The lobby was elegant, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, expensive artwork. Rose remembered choosing every detail when the building was being constructed 10 years earlier. Now she was entering it as a homeless stranger, seeking help from her own grandson. She took the elevator to the penthouse floor, her heart pounding not from exertion, but from the weight of what she was about to do. 5 years of watching, waiting, and hoping had led to this moment. Rose knocked gently on the door of Penthouse A. Through the door she could hear the sound of a television and what sounded like David talking on the phone. After a minute, she knocked again, a little louder. "Hold on," came David's voice from inside, clearly annoyed at being interrupted. The door opened and Rose found herself face to face with her grandson for the first time in 5 years. David Martinez was tall and handsome, well-dressed in expensive casual clothes. At 28, he had the confident bearing of someone who had never wanted for anything. But when he saw Rose standing in his hallway, his expression immediately shifted to irritation and disgust. "What the hell?" David said, looking her up and down. "How did you get up here? This is a private floor." Rose forced herself to stay calm. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir. I was wondering if you might be able to spare some change, or maybe a cup of coffee. It's very cold outside tonight." David's face twisted with revulsion. "Are you serious? You're panhandling in a luxury building. Security is going to hear about this." "Please," Rose continued, I don't care what you need," David cut her off harshly. "You don't belong here. This building is for people who can afford to live here, not for people like you." Rose felt her heart breaking, but she pressed on. "Sir, I'm not asking for much, just a small kindness. Maybe some food or—" "Listen, lady," David said, his voice rising. "I didn't work my ass off to inherit millions of dollars just to give handouts to every homeless person who shows up at my door." Rose's blood went cold. "You inherited your money?" "Yeah, from my grandmother. She died 5 years ago and left me everything, and you know what? I earned it by putting up with her for 20 years. David was warming to his subject now, clearly enjoying the opportunity to vent. The old woman was constantly lecturing me about responsibility and charity and helping people less fortunate. Well, guess what? I don't owe anyone anything." Rose felt tears stinging her eyes, but she forced herself to continue. "Your grandmother sounds like she was a kind woman." "Kind?" David laughed bitterly. "She was a control freak who thought she could buy my love with her money. The only good thing she ever did was die and leave me her fortune." The words hit Rose like physical blows. She had hoped, even after everything she had observed, that David might show some remnant of the sweet boy she had raised. But this casual cruelty was beyond anything she had imagined. "Sir," Rose said, her voice shaking slightly, "perhaps your grandmother was trying to teach you something important about—" "Look," David interrupted, stepping closer in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. "I don't know how you got past security, But if you don't get out of here right now, I'm calling the police." Rose looked into her grandson's eyes, searching for any trace of compassion or recognition. She found neither. "What if," Rose said quietly, "what if your grandmother wasn't really dead?" David paused, looking at her strangely. "What kind of weird question is that? What if she had been watching you all these years, seeing what kind of man you became with her money?" David's expression shifted from irritation to something approaching anger. "Lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but my grandmother is dead. I went to her funeral. I inherited her money. End of story. And what if she saw you throw coffee at a homeless man 3 weeks ago?" Now David looked genuinely unsettled. "How could you possibly know about that?" Rose reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. On the screen was a photo of David throwing his Starbucks cup at a homeless man outside the building. "What if she saw you refuse to help Mrs. Chen when she fell in the lobby last month?" David's face was getting red. "Who are you? How do you have these photos?" Rose showed him another photo, David walking past an elderly neighbor who had dropped her groceries, not offering to help. "What if your grandmother saw you berate the maintenance staff, insult your neighbors, and treat every person you consider beneath you with contempt and cruelty?" David was backing away now, clearly unnerved. "I'm calling security right now." "What if," Rose said, pulling back the scarf that had been partially covering her face, "your grandmother never died at all?" David stopped moving. For the first time, he really looked at Rose's face, and in that moment, 5 years of assumed grief and inheritance collapsed into recognition and terror. "No," David whispered. "No, that's impossible." "Hello, David," Rose said quietly. "It's been a long time." David's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, fear, and finally rage. You're supposed to be dead. I went to your funeral. You went to a memorial service for someone who wanted to disappear and watch her grandson from a distance." David was shaking now. "But the inheritance, the money, the lawyers said what I told them to say." "David, you've been living on a fraction of my real estate empire for 5 years, while I've been watching you become exactly the kind of person I hoped you would never be." The truth was hitting David in waves. "You've been spying on me? I've been hoping you would prove me wrong. I've been praying that the sweet boy I raised would emerge somewhere in the man you became." Rose's voice grew stronger. "But tonight, when you had the chance to show kindness to a stranger who needed help, you chose cruelty instead. You chose to kick someone when they were down." David was breathing heavily, his mind racing through the implications. The real will. Where's the real will? Rose smiled sadly. "Tomorrow morning, David, you're going to learn what your true inheritance is, but I can tell you right now, it's not what you've been expecting." She turned to walk away, then paused. "Oh, and David, the homeless man you threw coffee at 3 weeks ago. He was a private investigator I hired to document your behavior. So was the elderly woman you refused to help." David's knees nearly buckled. "How much of my life have you been watching?" "All of it," Rose replied. "Every choice you've made, every person you've hurt, every moment you had the chance to be kind and chose to be cruel instead." As Rose walked toward the elevator, David called after her, "Wait, Grandma, wait, I can change, I can be better." Rose stopped and turned back to him. For just a moment, her expression softened. "David, 5 years ago, when you thought I was changing my will, you told me you had put up with my boring stories and stupid rules for 20 years. I was young and stupid. 20 minutes ago, you told a homeless stranger that you earned your inheritance by putting up with me for 20 years. 5 years apart and your story hasn't changed." Rose's voice became gentle but firm. "David, I don't think you want to change. I think you want to avoid consequences." The elevator arrived, and Rose stepped inside. As the doors began to close, she looked at her grandson one last time. "I loved you enough to give you 5 years to prove me wrong," she said. "You chose to prove me right instead." The doors closed, leaving David alone in the hallway of the penthouse he was about to lose, finally understanding that his entire adult life had been built on a lie. And downstairs, Marcus and James had recorded every word of a conversation that would soon become a legal document in one of the most unusual inheritance cases in Illinois history. Rose Martinez sat in the conference room of Steinberg, Morrison and Associates, the law firm that had been handling her affairs for 30 years. Across from her sat David Reynolds, her estate attorney, Patricia Chang, her family law specialist, and Michael Santos, her corporate lawyer. It was 9 a.m., exactly 12 hours after her confrontation with David. "Rose," David Reynolds said, reviewing the documents she had brought, "are you absolutely certain about this decision? Once we execute these papers, there's no going back." Rose looked out the window at the Chicago skyline, seeing several buildings that she owned, but that David would never inherit. "David, I've been certain for 6 months. Last night just confirmed what I already knew." Patricia Chang leaned forward. "Rose, we need to discuss the legal ramifications. David is going to contest this will. He's going to claim undue influence, mental incapacity, fraud in the inducement. Every argument his lawyers can think of." "Let him try," Rose replied calmly. "I have 6 months of documentation showing exactly who my grandson has become. Video recordings, witness statements, private investigator reports, and as of last night, a recording of him expressing his true feelings about me and my money." Michael Santos looked up from his notes. "The recording was made with your consent and in the presence of witnesses. It's admissible. But Rose, the optics of this situation are unusual. The media is going to have a field day." "The media was always going to be involved," Rose said. "When someone with my net worth makes the kind of will I'm about to make, it becomes news." David Reynolds pulled out a thick document. "Let's review the terms of your actual will one more time, to make sure this is exactly what you want," Rose nodded. "Please." "First," David Reynolds read, "all assets currently being used by David Martinez, including the penthouse apartment, the cars, and the monthly allowance, will be terminated immediately." "Correct." "Second, David Martinez will receive a one-time payment of $100,000 to be paid out over 10 years at $10,000 per year, contingent on his completion of 200 hours of community service annually." "That's right. Enough to live modestly if he chooses to work and give back to his community." Joyce Patricia Chang continued reading. "Third, the remainder of your estate, approximately $340 million in real estate, investments, and liquid assets, will be divided among 3 entities." "Go on." $100 million will establish the Rosa Martinez Foundation for Homeless Services, to be managed by a board including Marcus Williams and James Chen. Rose smiled. "The 2 security guards, who showed me more kindness in one night than my own grandson showed in 5 years." Michael Santos read the next provision. $100 million will go to existing homeless shelters, food banks, and social services organizations in the Chicago area. "And the final $140 million, David Reynolds asked, though he already knew the answer. "Will be distributed directly to homeless individuals and families," Rose confirmed. "Small amounts that can make immediate differences in people's lives." Patricia Chang set down the document. "Rose, this is an unprecedented way to distribute wealth. Are you sure you don't want to leave anything substantial to David?" Rose was quiet for a moment. "David will inherit something valuable from me. He'll inherit the knowledge that his choices have consequences. He'll inherit the opportunity to become a better person if he chooses to." She stood up and walked to the window. "But he won't inherit money he hasn't earned through kindness and service to others." "There's one more provision we need to discuss," David Reynolds said. "The letter you want us to deliver to David along with the will." Rose had spent hours writing the letter, trying to find words that would explain her decision without being cruel. "Yes, I want him to understand why this happened." Michael Santos opened another folder. "We also need to discuss the properties David is currently living in, since he doesn't actually own the penthouse. He'll need to move out," Rose finished. "I've already arranged for him to have 30 days to find alternative housing, and I've asked Marcus and James to personally deliver the news." At that moment, across town, Marcus and James were standing outside Penthouse A, preparing for what might be the most difficult conversation of their careers. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked James. "I don't think anyone could be ready for this," James replied. "But Rose asked us to do it, and after everything she's been through, I think we owe her that much." Marcus knocked on the door. "David, it's Marcus from security. We need to speak with you." The door opened to reveal David Martinez, looking like he hadn't slept all night. His expensive clothes were wrinkled, his hair was disheveled, and his eyes were red-rimmed. "Is this about last night?" David asked. "Because I can explain." "David," Marcus interrupted gently, "we need to come in. There are some things you need to know." Once they were seated in David's living room, a space that Rose had paid for but David had never appreciated, Marcus began the conversation that would change everything. "David, first, you should know that James and I were present last night when you spoke with the homeless woman. We recorded the conversation at her request." David's face went pale. "You recorded it?" "We did. But that's not why we're here." James took over. "David, the woman you spoke to last night, her name is Rosa Elena Martinez. She's your grandmother." "I know that now," David said miserably. "But she's supposed to be dead." Marcus shook his head. "She was never dead, David. She's been living quietly for 5 years, watching how you used the money she allowed you to think you had inherited." "Allowed me to think?" James pulled out an official-looking document. "David, this is your grandmother's real will, the one that was just executed this morning." David took the document with shaking hands. As he read, his face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, devastation. This can't be legal," David whispered. "It's completely legal," Marcus confirmed. "Your grandmother has been of sound mind throughout this entire process. She has documentation of every decision she's made and every reason she's made it." David looked up at them, his face a mask of desperation. "But the penthouse, my car, my bank accounts, the penthouse belongs to your grandmother," James said gently. "It always has. The car is registered to her company. The bank accounts you've been using were set up as a trust that she's now dissolving. But what am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go?" Marcus handed him another document. "This is a letter from your grandmother. She wanted you to read it before you make any decisions about what comes next." David opened the letter with trembling hands and read aloud. "My dear David, if you're reading this, it means that my experiment is over, and you've learned the truth about the last 5 years of your life. I want you to know that I didn't do this to hurt you. I did this because I loved you too much to let you continue becoming someone I couldn't recognize. When your parents died, I promised them I would raise you to be a good man. For 20 years I tried to teach you about kindness, responsibility, and the importance of helping others. But somewhere along the way, my money became more important to you than my lessons. 5 years ago, when you told me I was stupid for considering charitable donations, when you said you had earned my money by putting up with me, I realized that I had failed as a grandmother. Not because you were a bad person, but because I had made it too easy for you to avoid becoming a good one. So I gave you a test. I gave you $50 million and disappeared, to see what kind of man you would become when you thought no one was watching. For 5 years, I hoped you would prove me wrong. I hoped you would use that money to help others, to build something meaningful, to become the person I believed you could be. Instead, you became cruel. David, you threw coffee at a homeless man. You refused to help an elderly neighbor. You treated service workers with contempt. And last night, when a stranger asked you for help, you responded with disgust and hatred. I'm not taking away your inheritance to punish you. I'm taking it away because I finally understand that giving you money without requiring you to earn it through kindness and service was the worst thing I could have done for your character. You now have a choice. You can spend the rest of your life angry about what you've lost, or you can spend it becoming the kind of person who deserves to inherit something valuable. Not money, but respect, love, and the satisfaction of helping others. If you choose the second path, you'll find that the money I'm not giving you is far less important than the person you could become without it. I love you, David. I've always loved you. But I love you too much to enable you to continue being someone who throws coffee at people who need help. Use this second chance wisely. With love and hope, your grandmother. When David finished reading, He was crying. "What am I supposed to do now?" he asked through his tears. Marcus and James looked at each other. They had expected anger, threats, demands for lawyers. They hadn't expected this raw vulnerability. "David," Marcus said gently, "your grandmother mentioned that you have 30 days to find new housing, but she also left instructions that if you want help transitioning to a different kind of life, she's willing to provide guidance." "What kind of guidance?" James consulted his notes. "She said she'd be willing to help you find work, locate affordable housing, and connect you with volunteer opportunities where you could start earning back her trust." David looked around the penthouse that had been his entire world for 5 years. "And if I don't want her help? Then you're free to build a life on your own," Marcus replied, "with the $10,000 per year you'll receive if you complete the community service requirements." David was quiet for a long time, processing everything he had learned. Finally, he looked up at Marcus and James. "Last night, when I was talking to that homeless woman, to my grandmother, I said terrible things." "Yes, you did," James confirmed, "and she heard every word." "She did?" David put his head in his hands. "I've lost everything, haven't I?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. "David, you've lost the money and the lifestyle, but your grandmother seems to believe you haven't lost the possibility of becoming a better person. Do you think she's right?" Marcus and James exchanged glances. They had both seen David at his worst, but they had also just watched him cry while reading his grandmother's letter. "David," Marcus said finally, "that's not for us to decide. That's for you to prove." 2 weeks after the will reading, the story of Rose Martinez and her grandson had become national news. The headlines ranged from sympathetic, "Grandmother's heartbreaking test exposes family greed," to sensational, "Secret millionaire lived in car to spy on grandson." Rose found herself at the center of a media storm she hadn't anticipated. Her phone rang constantly with interview requests, and reporters had started camping outside the modest hotel where she was now staying. But it was a different kind of call that came at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. "Mrs. Martinez, this is Dr. Sarah Chen from Chicago General Hospital. We have David Martinez here, and he's asking for you." Rose's blood went cold. "Is he hurt?" "He's physically fine, but he was brought in last night after what appears to have been a panic attack. He's been asking to speak with you since he arrived." An hour later, Rose walked into David's hospital room to find her grandson sitting on the edge of the bed, looking smaller and more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. "Grandma," David said when he saw her, his voice hoarse. "Thank you for coming." Rose sat down in the chair next to his bed. "David, what happened?" "I couldn't breathe," David said simply. "Last night I was trying to pack up the penthouse and I just couldn't breathe. Everything hit me at once." He looked at his hands. "I kept thinking about that homeless man, the one I threw coffee at. I kept wondering if he was somebody's grandson, somebody's son. I kept wondering what his grandmother would think if she saw what I did." Rose felt her heart aching for the boy she had raised and the man he had become. "The doctors said it was a panic attack brought on by stress and guilt," David continued, "but I think it was something else." "What do you think it was?" David looked up at her, and Rose saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen in years. Genuine remorse. "I think it was my conscience finally working again." They sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of 5 years of deception and disappointment hanging between them. "Grandma," David said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." "What is it?" "Do you think there's any chance I can become the person you wanted me to be? Or is it too late?" Rose studied her grandson's face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something she hadn't seen since he was a child, genuine uncertainty and the desire to do better. "David, what do you think?" "I think," David said slowly, "that I've been acting like someone I don't actually want to be. I think I got so used to having money that I forgot how to have empathy." He paused. "But I also think that maybe if I work really hard, I can remember what you tried to teach me when I was young." Rose felt tears forming in her eyes. "And what was I trying to teach you?" "That kindness is more valuable than money. That helping people is more important than helping yourself. That who you are matters more than what you have." David's voice grew stronger. "And that being loved for who you are is better than being envied for what you own. Rose reached over and took her grandson's hand. David, do you really believe that? Or are you saying what you think I want to hear? David was quiet for a long moment. Grandma, I'm going to be honest with you. Part of me is saying this because I hope you'll change your mind about the will. Rose appreciated his honesty, but part of me is saying it because for the first time in years, I looked at myself in a mirror and didn't like what I saw. David squeezed her hand. The panic attack wasn't really about losing the money. It was about realizing that I had become someone who throws coffee at people who need help. Rose felt a spark of hope. And what do you want to do about that? I want to start over. Not with money, not with your help, but with work, helping real people. David sat up straighter. I want to volunteer at homeless shelters. I want to learn what it's like to serve other people instead of expecting to be served. I want to find out who I am when I don't have money to hide behind. Rose studied her grandson's face, looking for any sign of manipulation or performance. What she saw instead was exhaustion, humility, and something that looked like genuine determination. David, if you do those things, it needs to be because you want to become a better person, not because you want to earn back an inheritance. I understand. And it needs to be permanent change, not a temporary performance to impress me. I understand that too. Rose was quiet for several minutes, thinking about everything that had happened over the past 6 months. David, I'm going to make you an offer. Not a financial offer, but an opportunity. David looked up with cautious hope. I'm going to give you 6 months to prove to yourself, not to me, but to yourself, that you can be the person you say you want to become. What does that mean? Rose pulled out her phone and scrolled to a contact. This is the number for Marcus Williams. He's now the director of the Rose Martinez Foundation for Homeless Services. She handed David a piece of paper. Marcus has agreed to let you volunteer at the foundation, doing whatever work needs to be done. Cleaning, serving meals, helping people find housing, whatever is needed. David took the paper. And then what? And then, after 6 months, if you've proven to yourself that this is who you really want to be, we'll talk about your future. What kind of future? Rose smiled for the first time since entering the hospital room. David, if you spend 6 months genuinely helping people and genuinely changing who you are, I'll consider making you a paid employee of the foundation. David's eyes widened. You'd hire me? I'd hire the person you become after 6 months of real service to others. I wouldn't hire the person you've been for the past 5 years. Rose stood up to leave. But David, understand this, if you take this opportunity and waste it, if you go back to being cruel or entitled or selfish, there won't be another chance. David nodded solemnly. I understand. And understand this too. The money is gone. The penthouse is gone. The lifestyle you've been living is gone forever, regardless of how this turns out. I understand that too. Rose paused at the door. David, do you remember when you were 8 years old, right after your parents died, and you asked me why bad things happen to good people? David nodded. Do you remember what I told you? David thought for a moment. You said that bad things happen to everyone, but good people use bad experiences to become kinder and stronger. That's right. And what did I say about people who use bad experiences as excuses to become cruel? David's voice was barely a whisper. You said they choose to let their pain make them smaller instead of bigger. Rose smiled sadly. You have a choice to make now, David. You can let losing my money make you smaller, or you can let it make you bigger. As Rose left the hospital, she felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years, cautious optimism about her grandson's future. But she also knew that the hardest part was still ahead. David would now have to prove, day after day, that his change of heart was real. And she would have to decide whether the boy she had raised was still somewhere inside the man he had become. The Rose Martinez Foundation occupied a converted warehouse on the south side of Chicago. What had once been an industrial space was now a comprehensive service center with emergency housing, a community kitchen, job training facilities, and administrative offices. Rose walked through the building at 6 a.m., as she did every morning, checking on the overnight guests and preparing for another day of serving people experiencing homelessness. In the 6 months since the foundation opened, they had helped over 800 individuals find stable housing, provided over 15,000 meals, and connected hundreds of people with job training and mental health services. But Rose wasn't thinking about statistics as she made her rounds. She was thinking about David. Her grandson had been working at the foundation for exactly 6 months and 2 days. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., he arrived to help prepare breakfast. Every evening, he stayed until the last guest was settled. In between, he did whatever work was needed, cleaning bathrooms, serving meals, helping people navigate social services, or simply listening to stories from people who rarely had anyone to talk to. Rose had watched this transformation with a mixture of hope and skepticism. The change appeared to be genuine, but she knew that real change took time to prove itself. This morning she found David in the kitchen, working alongside Maria Santos, a formerly homeless woman who was now the foundation's head cook. "Good morning, David," Rose said. "Morning, Grandma," David replied, not looking up from the eggs he was scrambling. The casual affection in his voice was something Rose had missed for years. "How many for breakfast today?" Rose asked Maria. 47 overnight guests plus about 20 day visitors expected," Maria replied. "David got here early to help prep the extra food." Rose watched her grandson work. His movements were efficient and practiced now, the result of 6 months of manual labor. Gone was the soft, pampered appearance of his wealthy years. In its place was someone who looked like he had earned every muscle through honest work. "David," Rose said, "could you come to my office when you're finished here? I need to speak with you." David looked up, and Rose saw a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. I just need to discuss something with you." An hour later, David knocked on Rose's office door. Through the window, he could see several people waiting inside: Marcus Williams, James Chen, Patricia Chang, the lawyer, and Dr. Sarah Chen from the hospital where David had been treated 6 months earlier. "Come in, David," Rose called. David entered the room, feeling like he was about to face a tribunal. "What's going on?" "Sit down," Rose said gently. "Today marks 6 months since you started working here." David nodded, suddenly understanding. This was his evaluation. "David," Rose continued, "6 months ago I told you that if you could prove to yourself that you wanted to become a better person, we would talk about your future." "Yes, ma'am." Rose looked around the room at the other people gathered. "I asked these people here because they've all been watching your progress from different perspectives." She nodded to Marcus. "Marcus, you've been David's direct supervisor. What have you observed?" Marcus consulted a folder. "Rose, in 6 months, David hasn't missed a single day of work. He's never been late. He's never complained about any assignment, no matter how unpleasant." Marcus looked at David. "More importantly, I've watched him develop genuine relationships with the people we serve. They trust him, and they seek him out for help." James Chen spoke next. "I've been watching how David interacts with people when he thinks no one is looking. He's patient with difficult guests. He's gentle with people who are struggling with mental health issues, and he's shown real leadership in training new volunteers." Dr. Chen had a different perspective. "I've been meeting with David monthly to discuss his emotional and psychological adjustment. What I've seen is someone who has genuinely confronted his past behavior and made fundamental changes in how he relates to other people." Patricia Chang, the lawyer, had the most unexpected contribution. "David came to see me last month. He wanted to make sure that he wasn't legally entitled to any part of Rose's estate, because he wanted to make sure his work here wasn't influenced by any expectation of financial gain." Rose raised her eyebrows. She hadn't known about this. Patricia continued, "He also asked me to help him set up a small scholarship fund using his own savings, money he had left over from his old life. He's giving it to young people aging out of foster care." David looked embarrassed. "I didn't want anyone to know about that." "Why not?" Rose asked. "Because I'm not doing it to impress anyone. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do." Rose felt her heart swell with pride and love. "David, how do you feel about the work you've been doing here?" David thought for a moment. "Honestly, it's the hardest work I've ever done, and it's also the most satisfying." "What's been the hardest part?" Learning to listen to people without trying to fix their problems for them. Learning that sometimes the best help you can offer is just treating someone with dignity. David paused, and confronting the fact that for 5 years, I was exactly the kind of person who makes life harder for people who are already struggling. And what's been the most satisfying part? David's face lit up. 3 weeks ago, a man named Robert came to us. He'd been homeless for 2 years, and he was convinced that he was worthless and that no one cared whether he lived or died. David's voice grew stronger. Yesterday, Robert got a job and moved into his own apartment, and when he left, he told me that the thing that kept him going was knowing that every morning someone would be here who was genuinely happy to see him. David looked around the room. I never knew that you could feel proud of yourself just for making someone else feel like they mattered. Rose felt tears forming in her eyes. This was not the grandson who had thrown coffee at homeless people. This was someone entirely different. David, Rose said, I have a proposal for you. David straightened up, nervous but hopeful. I want to offer you a permanent position as Assistant Director of the Rose Martinez Foundation. The salary would be $45,000 per year, enough to live modestly but comfortably. David's mouth fell open. You want to hire me? I want to hire the person you've become, Rose clarified. The question is, do you want the job? David was quiet for a long moment. Grandma, can I ask you something first? Of course. If I take this job, will things go back to the way they were before? Will you start supporting me financially again? Rose was surprised by the question. David, why are you asking that? Because I need to know that if I say yes, it's because I want to do this work, not because I want to go back to being dependent on your money. David looked around the room. These past 6 months have been the first time in my adult life that I felt proud of who I am instead of ashamed. I don't want to lose that. Rose stood up and walked around her desk to stand in front of her grandson. David, if you take this job, you'll be an employee who earns his salary through his work. Nothing more, nothing less. She paused. But you'll also be my grandson, who I'm proud of for the first time in years. David stood up and hugged his grandmother tightly. Then yes, I want the job. As the others in the room began congratulating David, Rose felt a sense of completion she hadn't experienced in decades. Her experiment had worked. Not the way she had originally planned, but in a way that was even better. She had lost the entitled, cruel grandson and found a compassionate, hard-working man who happened to share her DNA. More importantly, David had lost a fortune and found something far more valuable, the ability to respect himself. The first annual Rose Martinez Foundation Gala was held at the Palmer House Hotel, one of Chicago's most elegant venues. The irony wasn't lost on Rose. A year earlier, David would have attended such an event as a privileged guest, spending inherited money on champagne and designer clothes. Tonight, he was there as the assistant director of the foundation, wearing a suit he had bought with his own salary, introducing donors to the people whose lives had been changed by their generosity. Rose watched from across the room as David spoke with Margaret Chen, a wealthy philanthropist, who was considering a major donation. Mrs. Chen, David was saying, I'd like you to meet Sarah Rodriguez. A year ago, Sarah was living in her car with her 2 children after losing her job and her apartment. Sarah, a 34-year-old woman in a simple but elegant dress, smiled at Mrs. Chen. Mr. Martinez helped me navigate the housing assistance program and connected me with job training. Now I'm working as a medical assistant and living in my own apartment. Mrs. Chen looked impressed. That's wonderful. How long did the transition take? 6 months, Sarah replied. But the most important thing wasn't the housing or the job training. It was having someone believe that I was worth helping. She looked at David with obvious affection. Mr. Martinez never made me feel like I was a charity case. He made me feel like I was a person with potential who just needed some support. Rose felt tears in her eyes as she watched this interaction. This was not the grandson who had once told her that homeless people should solve their own problems. Marcus Williams appeared at Rose's side. What do you think? He asked, nodding toward David. I think, Rose said, that sometimes the best way to save someone is to stop trying to rescue them and start requiring them to rescue themselves. Any regrets about how you handled things? Rose considered the question. I regret that it took me 5 years to act. I regret that David had to lose everything before he could find himself. But I don't regret the outcome. She paused. Marcus, can I ask you something? Do you think David's change is permanent? Marcus had been working closely with David for over a year now. Rose, I think David has learned something that you can't unlearn once you really understand it. What's that? He's learned that helping other people feels better than helping yourself. Across the room, David was now speaking with a group of potential volunteers, explaining the Foundation's programs with the passion of someone who had seen them work firsthand. The most important thing to understand, David was telling them, is that homelessness isn't a character flaw. It's a situation that can happen to anyone, and with the right support, people can recover from it completely. A young woman in the group asked, How did you learn so much about homelessness? Do you have a background in social work? David smiled. I learned by spending 6 months sleeping in a car and asking for help from people who didn't think I deserved it. The group looked confused, so David continued, I learned by being humbled, and then by doing the work of helping others who were going through what I had experienced. Rose couldn't hear the rest of the conversation, but she could see the group's faces changing from polite interest to genuine engagement. At the end of the evening, as the last guests were leaving, David approached Rose. Grandma, can I talk to you for a minute? They found a quiet corner of the hotel lobby. I wanted to thank you, David said. For what? For loving me enough to let me fail. Rose looked at her grandson with curiosity. What do you mean? I mean, David said, that if you had kept supporting me financially, if you had kept bailing me out and making excuses for my behavior, I would never have learned to support myself or care about other people. David paused. You could have kept me comfortable and cruel forever. Instead, you forced me to choose between staying the same or becoming better. Rose felt her heart fill with love and pride. And which did you choose? I chose to become someone I could respect, David replied, and for the first time in my adult life, I actually like who I am. Rose hugged her grandson tightly. David, you've given me the greatest gift a grandmother could ask for. What's that? The knowledge that the boy I raised is still there underneath all the mistakes and selfishness. The knowledge that love and good values, once planted, can survive even years of neglect. As they left the hotel together, Rose reflected on everything that had changed since that night 6 months earlier, when she had slept in her car outside David's building. She was still worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She still owned 50 houses and dozens of commercial properties. But now her wealth was being used to create opportunities for people to help themselves, rather than creating dependency in her own family. More importantly, she had her grandson back. Not the entitled, cruel man he had become, but the kind, thoughtful person she had always hoped he could be. Sometimes, Rose reflected, the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone's worst impulses, even when it breaks your heart to watch them struggle. And sometimes, the most valuable inheritance you can leave someone is the knowledge that they're capable of earning love and respect through their own actions. David would never inherit her money. But he had inherited something far more valuable, the ability to create meaning and satisfaction through service to others. And Rose had learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the positive impact you can have on the world and the people you love. 6 months of sleeping in a car had taught her more about what really mattered than 40 years of accumulating wealth had ever done. It turned out that the homeless woman had been the richest person in the story all along. What did you think of Rose's incredible journey? Her decision to live homeless for 6 months to test her grandson shows us that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone's worst behavior. Rose's story reminds us that true wealth isn't about how much money you have. It's about the positive impact you make on the world. This powerful tale demonstrates that it's never too late for people to change, but change must come from within, not from external rescue. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what really matters. Leave your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 0 to 10. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to hear more incredible stories about ordinary people making extraordinary sacrifices to help others become their best selves. Would you have made the same choice Rose did? Let us know, and check out more inspiring stories right here on the screen.